Hello, hello, hello. All right. Hello, my friends. Welcome to my live stream and welcome to my base. Well, I'm so excited. Welcome to my book garden. Actually, welcome to my basement, but all the same, I'm happy you're here. I'm going to give it a few minutes, see who joins in. Oh, I'm Rosebud Reads. I'll kind of do the little copyright stuff right now while we're waiting. We will be reading Little Mushroom, or continuing reading Little Mushroom. And I don't own any the copyrights or rights to Little Mushroom. I'm not gaining anything from this other than the enjoyment of doing it. And I don't own anything other than the physical copy I have in front of me, connected to my book stand, and the time that I'm taking to do this. That is all I own. I claim nothing else. I see someone has joined. Welcome. I'm very excited that you're here. We're just going to give it a couple more minutes, see if anyone else joins, and then we'll go ahead and get started. While we're waiting, if you want to share anything in the chat, I'd love to respond. Any questions or just how your day has been? That'd be wonderful. If you don't want to, you don't have to either. Like, that is also completely fine. I'm gonna get a sip of tea. Also, hopefully I'm coming across all right. I always wonder. Okay, I'm gonna give it 2 minutes. Oh yeah, so I added more to my wall, which I was very excited about. I got candle going, so it smells nice. Got my blanket because it's cold, because I'm in my basement. I mean, my book garden. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. I know I said 2 minutes, but I'm excited. All right. So, kind of as like a little summary of, hi, welcome to be here. I'm excited you're here. Cookielicious, thank you so much. I know, I was really surprised that Kichter did that. I've been asking kind of some questions, kind of bugging them. I almost feel like just for some help on how to do this, and they have been so gracious. So I'm really excited that you're here and hope you enjoy it. Yeah, if you have any questions. Oh, welcome, Momars Rover. I'm curious, are you Spacey or are you someone else? Just because I'm like, it's got the Mars rover, so I was like, Spacey, Mars rover. I may just be reading into it. If whoever you are, I'm super excited you're here. Yeah, no, as I was saying, I'm so thankful that Hector did that. Little nervous myself. So we'll see how this goes. But yeah. So as I was saying, a little summary from before. I know you've probably watched it, but just in case, it's been a while. We had Anji in the third level, the black market, and we had a xenogenic episode going along where someone had gotten through and there was an infection, and we got to see our Colonel pop out in the market, and Anji discovered that the brass casing that he was holding actually belonged to our Colonel. And that's kind of where we are now. Like, On that note, let's go ahead and get started with Chapter 7. So it says, Chapter 7, AD 4117, my communicator number. Yeah, they always have the most interesting titles. All right. How come you moved the colonel to one side again? Mr. Shaw asked loudly as soon as he entered the shop. Anji had just sat up on the bed. Rubbing his eyes, he said in a small voice, I can't sleep well with him next. You're so finicky. Mr. Shaw walked over and gave him a hard knock on the head. Several days ago, you weren't even capable of sleeping while hugging a human head, right? Anji wordlessly buried his head beneath the quilt once more. A human head was a human head, and Lu Feng was Lu Feng. The xenogenic, who the arbiter had repeatedly nitpicked, he didn't need a reason to be afraid of that person. Deducting your wages. Left with no other choice, Anji could only get back out from under the quilt and slowly put on his coat. The tone of Mr. Shaw's voice turned facetious again. Facetious again. I think you better not go out to seduce mercenaries. Just work hard with me instead. How come? Anji asked. Mr. Shaw wasn't saying that yesterday. With your small appearance? Tisk. It's no good, Mr. Shaw said. Those mercenary ruffians, they'll bully you. Why would they bully me? For fun, probably. I mean, he hasn't had the best luck with people, let's be real. Done talking, he knocked Anji on the head once more. Anji frowned. He felt that Mr. Shaw was bullying him already for his actions just now. However, he had no choice. He was currently just like a parasite, dependent on the pay from Mr. Shaw. So he could only obediently get out of bed and wash up, then throw himself into the day's work. Today was the 30th day since he had started making mannequins. In other words, they had to completely finish the mannequin and then deliver the goods to the customer's doorstep by tonight at the very latest. Mr. Shaw had finished the torso and limbs 10 days ago, though it was mainly Anji who had made them under his guidance. After doing those things, he picked out a prop gun from the ones being sold in the shop and put it together with the mannequin. Finally, through the black market, they obtained a near-identical black uniform and dressed the mannequin in it. Now the mannequin of the arbiter had a perfect body and only needed a head. At present, Anji was holding the mannequin head, checking to see whether the alignment of the hairs he had personally implanted were pleasing to the eye. In the meantime, Mr. Shaw had fired up a melting furnace nearby, was stirring transparent adhesive in a small white ceramic pot with one hand, while adding green dye one drop at a time with the other hand. The dye initially formed a dark green blob on the pot, but after a short while, countless tiny tendrils stretched from it and dispersed outwards. With the stirring, it was evenly distributed, and the adhesive became a light green that gradually darkened. Anji had nothing to do after he had finished examining hair, so he stared at the color, calling Lu Feng's eye color as he watched. In the light, they were a green like that of leaves frosted over with ice. Often, when that pair of eyes looked at Anji, he would start to feel cold. In the dim lighting of the night, Lu Feng's eyes would appear to be a deep, dark green, like a fathomless lake in the night that was hiding many unknown things. As he was thinking, he paid attention to the substance's color. Once it matched the eyes in his memories, he said, "That is good." With a smile, Mr. Shaw extinguished the melting furnace and said, "You have good eyes." Anji handed the mold to Mr. Shaw without a word. The translucent material was poured into the spherical mold and allowed to cool and set. Then, once they were embedded into the eye whites, the eyes were completed. Right away, those eyeballs were installed in the mannequin's eye sockets. The mannequin's eyelashes were also Anji's handiwork, planted one by one. Now, the black eyelashes gently covered the green eyes, and even the most minute subtleties of the cold expression was visible. It was truly too similar to the real person. Feeling anxious, Anji picked up the black service cap and put it on the mannequin. Means it was really well made if he's getting anxious and scared from a doll. The next tasks were to tune the joints and polish the facial details. When they were completely finished, it was 7 o'clock in the evening. Anji silently looked at the mannequin, and the mannequin silently looked back at him. Felt that it looked utterly like the Colonel himself. They folded up the mannequin that looked utterly like the Colonel himself at the joints and placed it in a rolling suitcase. Mr. Shaw clasped his hands and said, "Can be delivered now. I'll get Jensen to deliver it. He's cheap." I feel like that's almost a bad decision. Like, with something that's expensive, you really want to go for the cheap guy. Like, I don't know. It just seems like a bad business decision. Jensen was the black-clad youth who sold cell phones and handed over the arbiter's data to Mr. Shaw. But although Mr. Shaw dialed repeatedly on his communicator, nobody answered. Mr. Shaw frowned. What's going on? Did he get discovered? He dialed Hubbard's communicator instead, but a voice immediately came from the receiver. The party you have dialed has left the base. Please leave a message. Mr. Shaw turned to look at the tablet computer on the workbench, tapped on it, and deleted all of the photos with a few quick motions. He said to Anji, "Something's not quite right. Let's hurry up and get rid of the goods. There's nothing else to do tonight, so come deliver it with me." Thus, Anji came to District 6, where he hadn't set foot for a month already. Unit 4, Room 312 in District 6's Building 13 was their commissioner's location. The suitcase was very heavy, so Anji and Mr. Shaw took turns carrying it up the stairs to the 3rd floor. Unlike Building 117, where Anji lived before, Building 13's residents were all women. Along the way, Anji ran into a good number of them. Most of them had short hair, tall statures, and distinctive and strong facial features. As he looked at them, Anji couldn't help but think of Duce again. Duce was a very special woman. She was tall but slenderer than all of the other women Anji had seen. Taller than all of the other women Anji had seen. Sorry about that. At the same time, her bosom was fuller than other people's. Because of this slender fullness, her body seemed strangely soft. And this softness was very rarely ever seen on the 3rd underground floor. Sorry about that. Just had a problem with that paragraph, apparently. At the same time, he saw that Mr. Shaw was also casting unrestrained looks at the women passing by. In the end, Mr. Shaw said, "There's no second Duce." Without saying anything, Anji gently tapped on the door to number 12. "Hello, we've come to make a delivery." Nobody opened the door. Anji's knocking became a little louder. "Hello, we're here to make a delivery." Still, nobody opened the door. Mr. Shaw took a step forward and pounded the door a few times with his fist. Nobody opened the door. Mr. Shaw took a step forward and pounded the door a few times with his fist. "Is anyone there? It's a delivery from the 3rd underground floor." Silence. Amidst the silence, footsteps came from behind them. Anji turned his head and saw a middle-aged woman dressed in gray. He said, "Hello, are you the resident of number 12? The woman shook her head and looked at the door. "Two are looking for her?" "Mm-hmm," Anji said. "She ordered something and we've come to deliver it." There was no expression on the woman's face as her gaze shifted to the suitcase Mr. Shaw was pulling. "What goods?" "Premium goods. Anything else? We can't say," Mr. Shaw said. "Is she not in? When will she return?" The woman looked at her, the corners of her lips drawn taut. For a short while, she didn't say anything. Unable to bear it any longer, Mr. Shaw said, "Is she?" Just as the words left his mouth, the woman said, "She's dead. You guys didn't know?" There was a brief silence. "Dead?" After a brief pause, Mr. Shaw raised his voice. "Then who's going to give me the rest of my payment?" The corners of the woman's mouth twitched. With an expression that held the shadow of a smile, she replied, "The arbiter killed her. Go pay him a visit." Mr. Shaw, looking like a duck whose neck was being squeezed, said nothing for a while. But Hanji was suddenly stunned. As he looked at this woman, he asked, "What was she called?" As though the woman did not want to hear his words, she turned, lifted her hand, swiped the room door on the opposite side with her ID card, and walked in. The moment before the door closed from the inside, two simple syllables came from within. Doucet. Oh, it was Doucet that was ordering the doll. I kind of was not expecting that, in all honesty. Like, I probably should have, because she seemed kind of sweet on him. But that's kind of tragic. That hurts a little more. Ow. Anji once again thought back to the expression Doucet showed to Lu Feng before she died, and momentarily didn't know what he should say. Mr. Shaw was also silent. After a long time, he let out a sigh and said with a smile, "Do you know how much money this order was?" "I don't," Anji said. "Even more than Hubbard's order." Mr. Shaw looked at the rolling suitcase on the ground, his eyes half closed, and said slowly, "She played with so many men. I didn't think that she also could have genuine feelings." Anji said, "Doucet said that the arbiter saved her before." "Fool." Shaw sighed and shook his head. "The person that the arbiter is, even if he did save her, it was because he wanted to kill xenogenics. She had scraped a living off of men since she was young. She wasn't a little girl anymore, so how could she not understand this? It's not worth it." Anji didn't say anything. He didn't understand why Doucet liked Lu Feng either. However, compared to other people, Lu Feng was indeed different. What those differences were, though, he couldn't say. After a long time, Mr. Shaw said, "She's gone. So what should we do with the goods? Can't be tossed. If it's discovered, the trial court will definitely come looking for me." Anji said, "Then bring it back to the shop?" "Absolutely not." Mr. Shaw shook his head. "I can't get in touch with Jensen all of a sudden, so I'm afraid something happened." As he spoke, he looked at Anji and seemed to suddenly think of something. "I remember that your home is also in District 6. He jiggled the suitcase. "You don't live over there, so there's no fear of being seen. Let's do this. For tonight, bring the goods back to your place. After a few days, if no one checks, we'll find someone to buy it." It seems like a Ponzi scheme right there. Like, "Hey, not my car." Oh well. "What about you?" Anji asked. Mr. Shaw looked down at his watch and frowned. "I have to go back first. It's the last train." She thought for a while and felt that it was feasible. Didn't live at home, so it was fine to temporarily stash the mannequin up in there. Mr. Shaw patted his shoulder. "You can do it." And then he swiftly left to catch the train. Okay, I'm going to make a prediction before this even goes on. He's going to run into that best friend roommate who potentially had feelings but abandoned the original Anzi. And some shiz is going to go down. Making that prediction right now. I've never actually read this before, so we'll see what happens. Oh, but it turned out Anji couldn't do it. District 6 was a circular area, so Building 13 and Building 117 weren't far apart. This was also the reason why Mr. Shaw felt at ease about having him take the goods home. But the mannequin was solid and really couldn't be considered light. With practically turtle-like speed, he dragged the massive suitcase along the road. Yeah, I agree. I agree, Mars Rover. With practical turtle-like speed, he dragged the massive suitcase along the road. By the time he reached the floor of Building 117, the sky had already darkened completely, and he still has to get it up the stairs. By himself. Oof. Indistinct black shadows were everywhere, and the outline of the building was visible only by way of the aurora's glow. As NG stood in front of the building unit and thought about how he still needed to climb up to the 5th floor. Oh, that's rough, buddy. With the suitcase, he felt despair, for it really was very heavy. The despairing Anji turned around on the spot so he no longer faced the pitch-black staircase entrance, planned to stop and rest a little while first. The sound of burning breath suddenly came from behind him, and he was wrapped up in an abrupt... I called it! Called it! Hello, Andy? Welcome. Glad you could make it. Anzi! It was Josh's voice. I saw you from the window, so I immediately came down. Josh held him tightly. Where have you been? How come you've only come back now? Why didn't you tell me? I've been looking for you all of this time. Took a breath and then continued. You aren't allowed to leave again. Where have you been? Mr. Shaw's words were correct. Josh thought of Anji as his personal belonging. Thus, G calmly said, Please let go. Not only did Josh not let go, he tightened his grip instead. Are you angry at me? Josh asked. Before Anji said anything, he spoke up again in a low voice. I was wrong. I'll apologize to you. Whatever way you want me to apologize is fine. Anji, I love you. Anji was speechless. Sir Shaw's words seemed to be correct again. He really did want to bed Anji. Thank you, Anji said. But I have someone. You're truly angry, Josh smiled. You always did like to deliberately make me mad when you were angry. Anji really was very annoyed with this human. Struggled to free himself, but Josh forcibly turned him around. Look at me, Anji. Bang! A gunshot rang out. Ooh, I did not expect that part. I kind of did. Like I knew Arbiter was coming in somewhere. Did not expect it at that moment. Josh gave a start and reflexively let go of Anji, then turned around. Anji also looked in the direction where the sound had come from and saw that beneath the shadow of the black building, a person was standing there. The person had just fired into the air and was putting the gun away while walking over. Slim and tall, it was a figure he was extremely familiar with. You literally crafted him from the ground up. I hope you're familiar with him. Only military people could legally bear arms within the city. Within the military's various branches, only one kind of person could fire at will. Anji thought that he seemed to have stumbled into the path of the Arbiter's city patrol again. What a coincidence. Before he could carefully think about it, he heard Lu Feng's familiar cold voice. What is he to you? A neighbor, Anji said. Lu Feng walked up to him. From such a small distance, anyone could recognize that this was the Arbiter. Yeah, it is a bit awkward. It's like, and he's completely forgot about it because he's like, Josh, let go. Back the fuck up, buddy. Like, no thank you. And I have a feeling that suitcase is about to come up and it's going to be even more awkward for him. All right. Anji felt Josh abruptly stiffen next to him. AD 4117, my communicator number. Lu Feng's voice sounded nonchalant. Next time this kind of thing happens, if you are willing to contact me, he'll be arrested for indecency. Like, you gotta hand it to him. Like, he may be stone cold, like, he doesn't stand for quote unquote indecency. If it's forced, I guess. At least that's what I'm picking up from here. Maybe it's just for our mushroom boy. Anji lifted his head to look at Lu Feng. His reaction temporarily delayed somewhat. But since this man was the military colonel, it seemed that he really did have the duty of maintaining law and order within the city. He simply said, "Okay." Felt Josh, who was behind him, get even more stiff. But Anji couldn't be bothered to care about Josh at all, because Lu Feng was gently resting on the handle of the rolling suitcase. Oh boy. He asked, "Shall I help you bring it up?" Not your future boyfriend carrying your pretend future boyfriend, not that you know it yet, up the stairs. Talk up. Yay! Is it back? I'm sorry that took a while. I think it's back, though. Is it back? Hello? Am I live? It says I'm live. Is it back? It says it's live. And it doesn't look like it has a buffering issue at the top, but I didn't realize there were issues before. So I'm going to wait till someone responds. Sorry again about this. Sometimes my internet's good, sometimes it isn't. Oh, good. Yes, it's back. Okay. So, I guess that, I'm not sure how long it was, but I'll reread half a paragraph on the page previous so that we're all on the same page, literally. Anji realized that he himself had given away the floor earlier. But without waiting for Anji to react, Lu Feng already started walking to the unit's entrance, so he could only follow. Before entering the building, Anji even turned his head back to glance at Josh and saw that he was watching them, disconcerted and hardly moving a single step. Mr. Shaw had said that if Anji seduced a powerful mercenary, Josh would definitely take the long way around upon seeing him. By the looks of things now, that statement may have really been correct, even though the one at the side was the arbiter rather than some mercenary, and even though he actually had no relationship with Lu Feng whatsoever. However, in the brief span of this distraction, Anji had already fallen several steps behind Lu Feng. The colonel's legs were longer than his, so he could only increase his pace to catch up before entering the building together with Lu Feng. To conserve power, only the corridor's tiny emergency lights were giving off a faint glow. I'm sorry, I'm just double checking. The lights are still on. The place was very dark and very cramped. In the silence, the sounds of the colonel's combat boots treading on the floor were particularly distinct. Every single sound seemed to knock on Anji's heart. Based on his understanding of Lu Feng, the man was about to ask, "What's in the box?" But in a strange stroke of fortune, on the entire way to the 5th floor, Lu Feng didn't say anything at all. Anji stood at the entrance to number 14, took out his ID card, and swiped it to open the door. The room's curtains hadn't been drawn shut, so as soon as he opened the door, the aurora's glow came in through the window. The aurora's bright luster covered the greater part of the pitch-black sky. It was mainly green, with orange and purple at the edges. Anji entered and turned on the little light in the room. Based on the courtesy that the human community should have, he looked at the colonel who was standing next to the door and said, "Please come in." Lu Fang readily walked in and put the rolling suitcase next to the wall. Observing his expression, Anji felt that he was actually in a good mood and seemed like he didn't want to leave. He asked tentatively, "Are you going to continue patrolling?" Lu Fang leaned against the wall with his arms crossed and said, "No need." Those green eyes watching him, Lu Feng felt that the Arbiter did not completely believe that he was human, even now, and that he was still fastidiously searching for any possible slip-ups. Anji asked in a small voice, "Then what will you be doing later?" "Head back to the City Defense Agency to rest," Lu Feng said. Ji strove to converse with him in the manner of humans. "You aren't going back to the trial court?" "It's too far." "Oh." He felt that under the current circumstances he ought to invite the colonel in to sit for a while, but he wanted very badly for the other man to leave because although there appeared to be only one colonel in the room, there were actually two. That's pretty funny, the way they put that. He asked, "When are you going?" Lu Feng looked at him. Unji cast his gaze down and pursed his lips. "Go get me a glass of water," Lu Feng said. The tone was completely unlike that of a discussion or suggestion. No matter what the person said, it sounded like he was issuing orders. "Okay," Anji replied, picked up the water cup on the table and opened the door. From here, it was very far to the communal water room in the corridor on the floor. He looked over and watched the red and blue buttons, guessed as to whether Lu Feng liked to drink warm water or cold water. Very quickly, he pressed the blue button that represented cold water. There was no ice water here, otherwise he definitely would have gotten it for Lu Feng. I don't know why, but I feel like that's almost a dig. Like for some reason that just seems a little sassy. Afterward, as he held the water cup and thought about how he had to continue facing Lu Feng, walked back to his room with a heavy heart. The Arbiter helping him carry the suitcase upstairs late at night was just so he could come over and drink a glass of water. Could it have been that he was thirsty after being out on patrol all night? Once he told Mr. Shaw about the experience tomorrow, based on the fact that Mr. Shaw's head only contained one thing, he would definitely say, "He wants to bed you." Wrong. Anji stopped dead in his tracks. He suddenly recalled why Mr. Shaw had left the box with him. Because Jensen had clearly always been selling cell phones in the black market without causing any trouble, but he suddenly couldn't be reached. Mr. Shaw felt that something was fishy, so they couldn't take the mannequin of the Arbiter back to the shop. Frowning, he began to think back on Lu Feng's every action. Trial court's patrol were all conducted in groups, just like that time at the entrance of the black market when Lu Feng led 3 people. Why was he by himself now? And right downstairs from his home? Furthermore, this Lu Feng person seemed to have the ability to read minds. Previously, whatever abnormalities he had were all discovered. So how come he didn't ask at all about the suitcase's contents this time? Anji's hand, which had just landed on the door handle, froze. He thought that the Arbiter, perhaps, had come to capture him. He yanked his hand back, took out his communicator, and dialed AE77243, Mr. Shaw's number. 4 words appeared on the communicator's black and white electronic screen. Unable to accept call. The alarm bells in Anji's heart went off. But right at that moment, an authoritative and cold voice came from the other side of the closed door. "Come in." Anji's heart thudded wildly. He took a deep breath and then opened the room door. Saw Lu Feng standing in the same spot as before, head slightly bowed, with the rolling suitcase upright at his side. Anji didn't know what he was thinking. Anji took 2 steps and held out the cup. "Colonel, your water." Lu Feng didn't move a muscle. Something suddenly occurred to Anji. He slowly turned his head to look at the other side of the room. Then he met the gaze of the real Lu Feng. Oh, that's kind of funny. Like, I mean, he's probably terrified, but like that's kind of a funny way to realize that Lu Feng knew. Um, Lu Feng was sitting at his desk with legs crossed, his sitting posture lofty. His hands was a sheet of paper, and his head was tilted up to look at Anji. Anji now knew true despair. But at that very moment, all he could do was slowly take 2 steps forward and put the cup on the desk. Your water. Lu Feng picked up the water cup, put it to his mouth, and took a slight sip, then frowned slightly. Cold water. She didn't want to speak. He seemed to have done something wrong again. Saw Lu Feng put the water cup onto the desk again, put the paper back on the table as well, looked at him. Anji swiftly admitted his mistake. I was wrong. Oh, shit. I completely forgot about that paper. Yeah, I think you're right. Oh, man. Oh, no. Lu Feng didn't say anything. A full 10 seconds went by before he asked, what offense did you commit? I didn't get cold water for you. Or didn't get warm water for you. Cold water is also fine. Anji looked at the propaganda paper upon which "Oppose the Arbiter's tyranny" was written in bloody red, and his heart grew a bit cold again. He said, I participated in a legal demonstration? That's not it. He was done for. There remained only one offense that he possibly could have committed. What charge would cover the making of a mannequin of the Arbiter? As Anji felt self-loathing for not carefully looking at the base's laws before, strove to find the correct words. Mannequin. A mannequin used for that kind of bad purpose. The words Lu Feng said to Josh when they were downstairs popped into his mind. Despair, Anji said, indecency? Saw a shadow of a smile appear in Lu Feng's eyes. Have you looked at the base's laws before? I haven't. Lu Feng said, come here. Anji took a step forward. Hold out your hand. Anji obediently held out his hand. Lu Feng's words were still clipped. Same commanding tone, he said. Put it up here. Where? On me. It's a bit weird. Anji hesitated for a moment, then slowly placed his hand on the left side of Lu Feng's chest. The uniform silver buttons in the badge pinned to his chest were all cold and had lines decorating their surfaces. Didn't know why Lu Feng wanted him to do this. Click. The icy silver handcuff was clipped onto Anji's wrist once more. Lu Feng was expressionless. For indecency. Anji did not understand. Immediately afterwards, he saw Lu Feng lift up his communicator. Capture complete. 1 item of contraband seized. He said, come provide backup. The city defense, that's kind of an interesting play by, like, back and forth. We see a little bit of a sense of humor, like not a lot, but like there's a drop of sense of humor, just like little boop there in the Arbiter, right there in that exact moment. Sorry, I need a sippy sip. I got smart this time. I put everything in a nice big carafe so it'll stay warm longer. All right. The City Defense Agency's corridor was even darker and colder than the one in the residential building. G was taken to the first underground floor. The dim lighting, there were iron doors all around, and he realized this may be the human's prison. He was locked up behind one of them. You'll be tried tomorrow, Lu Feng said as he locked the iron door. You have 10 hours to prepare a defense. Feng said, I don't have a defense. It's what I thought, Lu Feng replied. Those words, he turned around and departed without even looking back, leaving only one sentence. Rest well. Clutching at the iron door, Anji watched Lu Feng's figure disappear in the corridor. Whispers came from the opposite side. Like I was saying, they won't skip over even one. If Hubbard hadn't gone out into the wilderness, he'd be eating prison meals too. Had me take the photographs in secret. You two really trapped me. After we get out, pay me. Go to Doucet. She placed the order and the bill hasn't even been paid yet. Then take me with you. For Mr. Shaw's and Jensen's voices. Anji looked in the direction of the sounds and strove to identify the two people who'd been locked up across from him in the dim lighting. You two are also here? Obviously, Jensen said. I was happily selling cell phones when people from the trial court took me away. Mr. Shaw sighed. After I separated from you, I haven't even entered the train station when I got caught. Jensen asked, What about you? How did you get caught? She didn't answer. Master, he said, what is it? Do I really make people want to bully me a lot? You only just realized, Mrs. Shaw said lazily. Why do you ask? She didn't answer that either. He asked, What offenses did you guys commit? Does it still need to be said, Mr. Shaw asked. The crime of illegally stealing the arbiter's information. Is that so? Anji asked. What? Mr. Shaw asked. How was that not the case for you? It was, Anji said. Mr. Shaw let out a long laugh. Your tone has even changed. What? Did someone bully you? G said indifferently. No. A quiet space, Jensen yawned. Prison beds are actually pretty soft. Unji looked around his own space. In the cramped prison cell, there was a soft plastic board measuring 1 meter by 2 meters placed in a corner with a folded white blanket at its foot. This was probably the so-called bed. He went over there and sat down cross-legged, then wrapped himself up in the thin blanket and leaned back against the wall. Footsteps came from the end of the hall, and eye-watering light brightened the corridor. 3 City Defense Agency soldiers were making the rounds with flashlights in hand. Soldiers passed by them. The one on the left said, There's 3 more now. Who brought them in? The Arbiter, I guess. Colonel Liu's powerful. Let's be honest, the City Defense Agency is just the trial court's logistic team now. Trial court wants to completely take control of the City Defense Agency, but the director is still holding out. The soldiers ran the flashlight beam over the faces and didn't say much else as they walked on. After examining them one by one, they left through another corridor entrance. After the sounds of their movements disappeared, the entire underground space became utterly silent, except for the prisoners' breathing. Anji could sense that there were very few people. From the distance came the sound of water dripping onto the plastic boards. Mr. Shaw murmured, So this is how the City Defense Agency wastes water horses. But the sound of the dripping water still continued, ceaseless and extremely consistent. Jensen said, It's a watch. Listening hard, Anji realized the sound was coming from next door to him and sounded once every brief interval of time. It wasn't dripping water, but rather the sounds of an old mechanical watch's movements. In the dark, the second hand went around at a constant pace and time stretched out endlessly. At last, Jensen said, Mr. Shaw, you have a lot of experience. How long will we be locked up for? Not too long, probably, Mr. Shaw said. For illegally stealing the arbiter's information will depend on its usage. It's fine so long as it doesn't bring any harm to the arbiter. I'm not sure that's right. You used it to make a profit, Jensen said. Even if we aren't locked up for too long, we'll have to pay fines, won't we? Then I'd rather be locked up for a few additional years, Mr. Shaw said. I'm not surprised. Like, that very much fits his character, let's be real. Jensen said with a sigh, The arbiter is the arbiter. Even taking pictures will get you detained. The future, I'll just stick to quietly selling cell phones. just I'd just taken a picture when people from the trial court pulled me away. The time I even thought I'd become a xenogenic at some point without knowing and got scared to death. Shaw didn't say anything. From Anji's neighboring cell, however, came the clear voice of a young man. I've seen the crime of illegally stealing the Arbiter's information before. Mr. Shaw asked, how long were they locked up for? The shortest was 3 days, the longest was 3 years, and one was executed. He wanted to assassinate the Arbiter. Mr. Shaw tentatively asked, did he succeed? He didn't. And he was still executed? That's just how the Arbiter's code is. The voice's tone was calm. Without the Arbiter's absolute safety, there would be no Arbiter's absolute authority. Shaw said, then we didn't have any intention to harm him, so how long will we be locked up for? Depends on the Arbiter's mood, really, the voice replied. Anji's fingers curled around the blanket. He felt that the Arbiter was in a good mood. I mean, she did smirk. He heard Jensen ask curiously, Buddy, what did you do? The voice said, they brought me up on charges of incitement and spreading fear. Jensen seemed perplexed. Huh? I wrote contributions for the Cultural Affairs Administration, and the City Defense Agency arrested me, the person next door said. The Cultural Affairs Administration closed down afterwards, yet I wasn't let out. So he was Anzi's colleague, Anji thought. He heard Jensen say, how long have you been locked up for? Lifetime imprisonment. Jensen clearly went silent for a moment. You're messing with me on this one. Person let out a laugh, but didn't reply. Anji thought for a while. Based on Anzi's memories, the job he had performed was a very safe one. He asked the neighbor, what did you write? Person said, summaries of the base history. My pen name is Poet. Have you read them before? I haven't, Anji replied. And do you want to listen? Your voice sounds very nice. Your voice sounds very nice too. Anji felt that he seemed to really want to talk, so he said, I want to listen. Stop. So Shaw spoke up. The crime you committed was incitement. Don't think about inciting our kid too. Just listening is fine. You don't need to be afraid of being arrested. There's a laugh in Poet's voice, since you guys already have been arrested and all. His words were very reasonable. Ever since I've been locked up here, I've had very few opportunities to talk about the things I spent a very long time sorting out, Poet said. But you guys also roughly know those things. Anji said, I don't know them. Oh, Poet said. Then I'll go into a bit more detail. Oh, we have some more people here. Hello. Sorry, I just noticed that there was another person. Or two. Welcome. I'm going to continue now, though. Let me think about where to start talking from. His words generally slowed. I'll start from the desert area, I suppose. Before the desert era was the era of great prosperity. The world had 7 billion people altogether, and in flatland regions you could drive for an hour and be able to come across a village or city. The cities were full of people. The edges of the cities were croplands, livestock farms, and factories that provided manufacturing materials for the cities. There were wars during that period, but they were all wars between countries. Animals and plants were not the opponents of human weapons. At that point, he paused, seemingly organizing his train of thought. A while passed before he said, that was the year 2020. Oh, no. 2020, huh? It's something from over 100 years ago now. When I was a mercenary, I went to the ruins of a research institute in the nation's capital city. There I dug out some information, which was a geomagnetism research report starting from 2020. Nobody in the vicinity said anything. He continued. Starting from that year, they detected that Earth's magnetic field was rapidly weakening. Do you guys know about magnetic fields? Jensen said. No need to ask me, buddy. I'm uneducated. At least he's honest. I think I really like Jensen, which means he's probably going to die. Mr. Shaw didn't say anything. The base doesn't teach these things, Poet said. Anyhow, in 2030, the geomagnetic field disappeared. That would be a very big problem. Very big. Jensen bluntly asked, so what exactly did the geomagnetic field do? Earth was a massive magnet with the south and north poles as its positive and negative poles. The geomagnetic field was everything, Poet said. After the geomagnetic field disappeared, compasses stopped working, biospheres all over the world were thrown into chaos, and human industries were all stopped, for there was no way to generate and use power. But those were the lightest consequences of the geomagnetic field's disappearance. The geomagnetic field, its most important role was to protect Earth. Earth is suspended in the cosmos, and there's cosmic radiation in all directions along with solar winds. But after these things encountered the geomagnetic field, they were deflected in other directions and didn't harm organisms on Earth's surface. So in 2030, after the geomagnetic field disappeared, the entire planet faced directly the assault of solar systems and cosmic radiation. The external radiation was so strong that most of the land was directly blown away by the storms. The water disappeared and the atmosphere thinned. Droughts, skin diseases, cancers, half of the people on Earth died. That was the desert area. Shit, Jensen said. However, the desert era ended very quickly. Poet let out a laugh, then continued. From when the geomagnetic field's changes were discovered in 2020, humans had already put forth countermeasures, divided into Plan A and Plan B. Flipped through so much information in the city ruins before finding out. Jensen's tone of voice had we're going to start that over. Jensen's tone of voice had become respectful. Do tell. Plan A was to construct massive magnetic field generators at two special locations on the continents of Asia and North America. One was called the East Pole and the other was called the West Pole. By replacing Earth's north and south poles with two magnetic field generators in the east and west, producing resonance with the charged particles in the solar winds, a new magnetic field would be produced and cover the entire world. Jensen clapped his hands a few times. Amazing. Plan B was to construct large underground cities and shift the heart of human existence from the planet's surface to the underground to free from the assaults of radiation and solar winds. Jensen continued clapping. Nice. In 2040, Plan B succeeded and the underground cities became available to live in. In 2043, Plan A succeeded, and a weak magnetic field covered the entire world. The atmosphere no longer deteriorated, and living organisms no longer died because of the cosmic radiation. Human technology began to recover, and this period of time between 2040 and 2043 was called the Dawn Age. At this point, Poet sighed softly. But mankind's most difficult times had only just begun. Anji opened his eyes wide. I know, Jensen said from the other side. The era of calamity came. Poet said. The cosmic radiation brought about unknown genetic mutations, resulting in very frightening things. Initially, it was superbacteria, fungi, and viruses. They propagated in the human cities, indiscriminately infecting all people and leaving corpses everywhere in the cities. Those who have been to the ruins in the wilderness all know about this. Anji asked, how did they survive? Survival was a matter of luck, Poet said. Within your genes, if you had immunity to these germs, you'd be able to survive, but otherwise, you'd die. The people remaining were all immune. In the end, of the 3 billion people on Earth who survived the desert era, 100 million or so remained. That's insane. But this wasn't mankind's most difficult time either. And afterwards, Anji asked, what happened afterwards, you all know. Could say that it was the unknown evolution brought about by cosmic radiation or some kind of virus we couldn't detect. Overall mutation of creatures occurred, and the entire world was occupied by those things. There must be something special on their bodies. As soon as humans came into contact, they'd be infected, gradually lose their human attributes, and be assimilated. They like to attack humans, and human genes are very tasty to them. And so the war began. This was the greatest war in human history. After taking a soft breath, Poet continued. The scattered humans had no way of withstanding the monster's attacks, so humans began to combine their remaining resources and establish human bases. Our ID numbers began with 3, which represents how this places mankind's third base. The underground city base, Virginia base, northern base, and southeastern base. The coalition of these 4 bases was the community of common destiny for mankind. After the bases were formed, humans could have a brief respite. Hence, you all can live like this now. With this sentence, the atmosphere in the prison seemed to relax. But then, with the next sentence, it dropped anew to the freezing point. Unfortunately, the bases weren't necessarily safe. Puck coughed a few times, and his voice gradually lowered. In 2061, there was an outbreak of rodent mutants, and the southeastern base fell. In 2073, marine xenogenics sneaked in, and the Virginia base fell. Fuck. Jensen suddenly interrupted him. Now I know why you'd commit crimes of incitement and maliciously spreading panic. City Defense Agency ought to seal your mouth. But I didn't do anything wrong, Poet said with a smile. I was only bumbling along in my boyfriend's mercenary team, collecting information everywhere from human ruins and then organizing and publishing them when I was sentenced to life imprisonment. Jensen said, your tongue ought to be cut out for good. You even had a boyfriend? Poet laughed. It's so boring inside the base. Why can't I have a boyfriend? Fair. Why can't he have a boyfriend? Huh? Huh, Jensen? No longer paying attention to Jensen, he said. So now only the northern base and underground city base are still in operation. These 2 bases protect the magnetic field generators, so the auroras over the bases are brighter than in other places. The auroras are the flow of particles within the solar winds. At this point, Poet sighed. I don't know if there is still any communication between the 2 bases. There's the entire Pacific Ocean between them, after all. I said earlier that mankind's most difficult time wasn't the death era, or the desert area. They're all death eras. Wasn't the desert era, nor was it the era of calamity, because the most difficult time is right now. Who knows what will happen next? Just as he finished speaking, the earth shook violently. Dust fell from the prison's ceiling and landed on Anji's head and body, making him cough, but then stronger vibrations started up. Jensen sprang to his feet and called out, Earthquake? It's not an earthquake. Anji heard the sound of Poet climbing to his feet next door, and the well-informed man rambled on about some things he couldn't understand. Earthquakes have transversive and longitudinal waves. Right now it's random vibrations with a very shallow hypercenter. There's something underground! She understood that sentence. Boom! Span of a moment, a long In the span of a moment, a loud sound came from the depths of the corridor, accompanied by the clanging of iron doors falling onto the ground. Boom! The sound came again. Vibration 100 times stronger than the previous one ripped through. Anji clutched the bars of the iron door to steady himself. Could tell what that sound was. There was something, a massive living creature, fiercely slamming into the floor from below. All right, and that is chapter 7. What a long chapter. All right, so I am going to take a quick tea break. Like, I'm just going to take some sippy. I do also love some good sci-fi world building exposition. What year was this written? Real quick, I'll take my tea break in a second, just because I want to know, was this published? Yep, 2022. All right, I know it was like written before this, but I was curious if this was written during the pandemic when shit was going down, which it gives me the feeling that it was. So I'm still planning on reading the other 2 chapters tonight. I'm just taking a quick tea break because my throat's starting to feel it just a little bit. All right. Chapter 8. Anji was so angry that he even wanted to extend his hype. And that is actually the title of chapter 8. Fuck, Jensen cried out. It's right below me. He was right. Immediately following, Anji felt the ground beneath his own feet begin to shake. The feeling was very close and very real, like a heavy hammer was beating the floor across from him. Loud crashing sounds came from the end of the corridor again. The rattle of the iron doors was accompanied by the alarmed cries, prisoners in that direction. I thought they were like the only 5 ones. Anyway, it's over there too, Poet's words abruptly sped up. Underground creatures, could it be rodents? They live in groups in the southeastern base was... Before he finished speaking, he swiftly corrected himself. That's not right. Rodents don't have such strength underground. The jumbled sounds of hasty footsteps came as a group of black-clothed soldiers sped down from the corridor stairs while waving their flashlight beams, and the sound of the loudspeaker echoing in the corridor. Its volume splitting said, "Do not panic. The City Defense Agency's foundation is very sturdy, as it is filled with cement and special steel plates. We are currently ascertaining the cause. Do not panic." They hadn't been swiftly opening the cell doors to let the prisoners out while they shouted, their words would have had seemed more credible. Yeah. The same time, a shrill sound began playing outside. The sound of the alarm rose and fell like waves. The evacuation alarm is going off. Jensen smacked the cell door hard. Buddy, hurry up and open it for me. Soldier hastily opened 3 prison doors in the distance, then quickly strode over. Mr. Shaw was towards the outside of the jail. After the soldier found the key corresponding to the cell door, he swiftly jammed it into the lock. With a click, the iron door opened. Mr. Shaw practically flung himself out, and the soldier swiftly said, "Turn right and go upstairs to find the exit." Shaw stumbled a little and then ran towards the right. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and a soldier wiped his face as he stood in front of Poet's door. Just then, Jensen shouted, "He's been in prison for life! He's a dangerous element! Open mine first! I'm a good citizen!" The soldier appeared to hesitate briefly. As the shaking of the ground Jensen clutched at the iron door with both hands, his voice trembling violently. "Hey, bud, hurry up!" Anji saw that the soldier's hand was trembling too. Only after making multiple attempts did he manage to stick the key into the lock. Jensen said, "You're my savior." His voice was abruptly cut off. And he was lifted up without warning. A huge black thing, pushed against broken bits of floor and dust, had suddenly sprung up. With a dull poof, Jensen's body was squeezed between the monster and the ceiling, and his eyes bulged out. Something sharp sliced open his abdomen, and blood mixed with viscera fell in splatters. There came a shrill scream. Anji's pupils dilated, and he slowly turned his head. The soldier who had opened the door had been stabbed in the thigh, and the right side of his chest by the crushed and twisted iron door, and was convulsing and rolling on the floor while holding his leg, coughing violently. Large globs of bloody foam continuously gushed from his mouth, so perhaps his lung had been punctured. With a bang, the black thing fell back down again heavily, broke on the ground, and it was empty underneath. Jensen's body fell in, never to be seen again. The other soldiers' shouts came from the depths of the corridor. Pull out! But in the following second, the tremendous roar of the ground creaking sounded over there as well. The iron doors clanged as they fell to the ground, and the ceiling splintered and fell. Two fearful yells rang out, then stopped abruptly. I think it responds to sound. I think that's where I'm getting it. I think it might be moles. Anji heard the sound of chewing. First was the sound of water, then the dull sound of friction, the sound of bodies being squeezed. Lastly, there was the sound of bones creaking and then splattering. The sounds came from the end of the corridor as well as from the underground cavity in front of Anji. While the soldier twitched and rolled around, his flashlight landed on the ground and rolled a few times. Its pale white glow lit up the pitch-black fissure. At the same time, a single hype bay reached out from the crack, the iron door, and additional hype bay then followed. They converged and snagged the splayed keys on the ground, then dragged them slowly towards the iron door. The keys scraped against the floor, making a harsh sound. Anji saw the soldier's fearful gaze that was aimed in his direction, but he was in no position to care. Neither the soldier was in no position to care either, because the latter had already breathed his last. Anji asked his neighbor, "What number is my door?" Poet's voice was trembling. 17? Are you okay? I'm okay, Anji said. He thought for a moment. His iron door was right next to Poet's iron door, so Poet's line of sight was limited, and he could not see Anji taking the keys. The Hype reacted. He swiftly grabbed the keys, found the one for number 17, and detached it from the rest. The chewing sound sped up. Holding the key to number 17, the Hype once again extended out through the door. A portion of the Hype stuck to the iron door, feeling for the keyhole's location, while the other portion of the Hype inserted the key. The Hype were very fragile and had limited strength. An increasing number of Hype converged, and the key finally turned. With a click, the door lock sprang open. Clutching the remaining keys, Anji pulled the door open and came to the neighboring door. His hands trembled a little as he found the key to number 18. Then, with the flashlight beam facing the keyhole, he shoved the key in and forcefully turned it to the left. At that moment, the chewing sounds stopped entirely. Ooh. I think somebody heard the door open. My God. A young man broke through the door and stumbled out. Before Anji even had the time to get a good look at his face, he firmly pulled himself over a soldier's body. Two of them ran towards the right-hand corridor, the only safe direction. The floor was still shaking as there was more than two things under the ground. At that moment, the emergency lights up ahead flashed a few times before going out completely, and the area ahead went entirely dark. Yeah, there's Anji's luck coming again. Ji heard Poet gasp for breath next to him. Don't look back. But Anji still turned his head back, unable to help himself. A bug. I was wrong. I thought I had a good idea, but it's a bug. It was a black worm that spanned more than half the width of the corridor. Its body was snake-like, but it was also divided into distinct segments. At that moment, it was slithering out through the massive fissure in the ground. Its head raised as it looked in Anji and Poet's direction. Maybe it could not be called a head, for it had no eyes, nor did it have any structures head ought to have. End of its body only had a round mouth containing densely packed teeth. Not gonna lie, that kind of sounds like a kind of centipede. Like they have that armor and all those legs. I don't like centipedes. Behind it, another identical worm was slithering over. Two mouths in which densely packed teeth, pressed against each other, unanimously faced them with a rustling noise. They approached, their speed not slow at all, and they were less than 20 meters away. Anji smelled the stench from their bodies. Poet gritted his teeth and said, "Go!" But the ground abruptly shook again, and the great force flung Anji against the wall. A sharp pain shot up his left arm. It seemed that he collided with a deformed iron door. Pushed himself back up with his arms, and Poet gave him a tug as well. Pitch black darkness, they once again sprinted towards what they recalled to be the direction of the corridor entrance. The darkness, anything could happen. Perhaps the third worm would break through the earth in front of them the very next second, or perhaps they would run straight into the wall because they could not see. He truly did run into a wall. Anji bumped his head against something with the consistency of metal and felt pain again. His entire body had collided with something. Then something wrapped around his waist in an attempt to scoop him up and stand upright once more. The wall also had hands. "Are there still living people behind you?" Lu Feng's voice sounded from extremely close proximity, his words faster than usual. Anji's heart practically stopped. He said no. The people inside were all dead. "Prepare the uranium shells, maximum equivalent," Lu Feng said. Just as he finished speaking, eye-watering white lights lit up from where they were and silently flew into the depths of the corridor. Before Anji could react, Lu Feng once again pushed him down. They rolled on the ground, and Anji found himself pressed beneath the man. Ooh. I mean, not the best time, but ooh. Sorry. Aha! I got it. I got it. All right. With the way things are going tonight, I think we might just finish chapter 8. Let me see. Let's see. Okay, chapter 9 is not that long. So maybe we can get through it. Yeah, let's give it a try. All right. I'm so sorry. This is not great. Sorry, friends. All right. So Lu Feng said go. Anji followed as they turned and ascended the staircase. He didn't have much strength left. Right? Let's do it. Didn't have much special skill. Whenever he couldn't keep up, the man pulled him along. He didn't know how long he had been blindly following, for when the ice-cold air from outside finally poured into his windpipe, he practically leaned against Lu Feng, panting the entire time. Lu Feng said, "It's fine now." "Apprentice! Apprentice!" Figure nearby approached and latched onto his arm, taking him from Lu Feng. It was Mr. Shaw. Anji finally recovered a bit, and his vision cleared as well. He said, "Poet." "I'm here." A voice came from behind him. Anji turned back and saw a young and good-looking person leaning against the wall with arms crossed. "Good-looking, huh?" Gasping hard from strenuous exertion as well. Once his breathing finally evened out, he said in a leisurely manner, "You're great at bumping into people." Anji was at a loss for words. However, without waiting for him to say anything, Lu Feng spoke up. "Director Howard," Lu Feng said, "you're late." Anji looked forward and saw a row of soldiers standing up ahead. Their leader was a tall man dressed in the City Defense Agency's uniform, with iron gray hair, a magnificent hooked nose, and an emblem on his shoulder identical to Lu Feng's. He also held the rank of colonel, and he looked to be the City Defense Agency's director. Howard's voice was as steady and cold as his person. "We originally were prepared to bomb indiscriminately. Stepping outside the bounds of your authority and entering put me in a difficult position, Colonel Liu. My prisoners were still in there, after all." Lu Feng's voice was icy. "Do you also dare to indiscriminately bomb at the ultrasonic dispenser's location?" There's no need for the trial court to be concerned with the City Defense Agency's facilities, Howard said. You'd better see if the people who came out from underground have been infected or not. Lu Feng said, there's no need for you to be concerned with the trial court's work either. I have a feeling there's beef in a story between these two. Like, I mean, it sounds kind of like the beef kind of between Army Navy, that sort of stuff, but like maybe this seems slightly personal. Lu Feng's right hand clasped Ji on his shoulder. Oh, wait, but Howard's gaze landed heavily on Ji. Ji briefly met his eyes and he realized the man was looking at his left arm. It had gotten injured underground and bled. Lu Feng's right hand clasped on Anji on his shoulder. I'll take him away and keep him under watch during the buffer period. Howard said, thank you for your hard work. Immediately afterward, he turned to the soldiers of the City Defense Agency. Prepare for bombardment! Then Lu Feng took Anji away as Mr. Shaw watched. Lu Feng's office in the City Defense Agency was in an annex of the main building. It was a room without any decoration whatsoever. Just as Anji entered, he locked the door. This might have been a type of preventative measure, Anji thought. If he really had been infected and turned into a monster, he wouldn't leave this room. He saw Lu Feng walk over to the gray office desk, open a drawer, and take out a white object that he tossed over. Anji unconsciously caught it and saw that it was a roll of bandages. Not gonna lie, for a second, I thought that might have been the spore. Like, I kind of thought he might have figured it out and was, like, cool with the mushroom for a second. I had hope. Alright. Anji unconsciously caught it and saw it was a roll of bandages. The arbiter probably meant for him to wrap up his wound. He sat down at another desk and chair set near the window and began to fiddle with the bandages. He thought that although the arbiter declared people guilty as he pleased, perhaps he yet could be regarded as a good person. Only to you, buddy boy. He was wounded on his left arm. It was small, only a scratch from the iron sheet. It didn't hurt much, but blood had oozed out. Anji tore off a length of bandage approximately half a meter long and began to wrap it around his left arm, his right hand. But he couldn't wrap it up. With great difficulty, he loosely wrapped it using one hand, but he couldn't tie a knot. Human fingers were not as dexterous as Haipei in the first place, and moreover, he only had one hand to use, and furthermore, he was by no means practically familiar with human limbs. But Anji felt that as someone who was human on the surface, it would be somewhat embarrassing if he couldn't even wrap a bandage, so he frowned and continued trying to tie a knot. He felt a gaze land on him. Lu Feng was watching him. He continued tying the knot. But as soon as he thought about how the arbiter was watching his every move, his knot-tying technique worsened. After trying hard for 3 minutes, not only did he not tie the knot, with a shaking of his hand, the bandages that had been wound around his arm came unraveled as well. The moment unraveled, Anji was so angry that he even wanted to extend his height. There's the title! A soft laugh came from the opposite side. In fact, it couldn't even count as a laugh. It was only the sound of a breath, very short, but Anji could tell. That sound was a derisive laugh, a mocking laugh. Anji was speechless. The arbiter was mocking him? Right at that moment, a hand appeared in front of his eyes. Long fingers and pale skin. Anji was far too familiar with this shape, for after Mr. Shaw finished making this hand, it was placed in the container at the head of his bed, where he could see it every night before going to sleep. It was Lu Feng's hand. With that, like, is this going to be a hand fetish thing? Like, we'll see. All right. I know, like, it was his job and all that, so, like, maybe I'm just reading in. All right. I know, like, it was his job and all that, so, like, maybe I'm just reading into. It was Lu Feng's hand. That hand picked up one end of the bandage while the other hand picked up the other end and looped the bandage around his arm a few times before tightening it slightly. Then Anji watched those 10 fingers nimbly interlock to tie a neat knot in the bandage. Feng was helping him with wrapping the bandage, although the man had laughed mockingly at him a second ago. He tugged down his shirt cuff and mumbled, "Thank you." Lu Feng said nothing in return. The sound of a loud explosion suddenly came from downstairs, but it was very muffled, as if it was coming from deep underground. Anji looked down. The City Defense Agency's layout consisted of 4 tall buildings surrounding a spacious atrium, and the building he was locked up in tonight was the shortest one. Right now, the interior of the building was in complete chaos. People inside were evacuating, and heavily armed soldiers entered one unit at a time with their weaponry. The sound of explosions rang out continuously, and the building creaked. The vibrations made the glass shatter, and some rooms had already been collapsed. The building that had been solid and magnificent just half an hour ago gradually turned into ruins. Like a white fog, dust and the smoke from the uranium shell explosions enveloped the area. The City Defense Agency soldiers, armed to the teeth, set up a cordon around it and erected radiation signs. The uranium shells used by the military were depleted uranium shells. They had strong penetrative power and relatively weak radiation, though long-term exposure would still harm people and required special handling. Most of the people evacuated from the building were scattered outside the City Defense Agency, but Mr. Shaw, Poet, and the other prisoners were placed in a makeshift tent in the atrium with 5 gun-carrying soldiers guarding them. Anji could see them. He saw Lu Feng stand up and walk to the window. Large ribbons of dark green aurora spread across the sky outside the window, looking very dazzling. Lu Feng's figure, as he stood in front of the window, was transformed into a black silhouette, and he turned his head to look at the other side of the atrium. Anji looked in the direction of his gaze and saw that on the other side of the atrium there was a massive black device resembling a black round disc, and layer after layer of massive octagonal coils encircled it. The disc curved smoothly inward, starting from the edges, and a stout conical object stood erect in the center. Very thin things, something akin to wires or utility lines, radiated outward, connecting the black cone, the coils. The entire device was even more colossal than the 2 buildings put together. If one were to stand beneath the disk and look up, it would be impossible to see the sky, no matter what direction they faced. Anji looked at it with his chin resting in one hand. He felt that human creations were colossal and strange. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Lu Feng take out his communicator and dial a number. His cold and quiet voice rang out, sounding like snow in the depths of wintertime. Trial Court, Lu Feng. Requesting transfer to the Lighthouse Center. The 2 of them were in close proximity. When the sound dispersed from the communicator's receiver, it reached Anji's ears as well. The other side replied, "Transferring now. Please wait." After approximately 20 seconds, a male voice came from the other side. "What's going on with the City Defense Agency?" Lu Feng said, "Underground invasion, large worm class. Suspected to live in groups. The City Defense Agency is safe for now." "Understood," the other party said. "The possibility of worms living in groups is extremely high. We will immediately dispatch the research team to the City Defense Agency. Pay attention to protect the dispenser." "All right." Just as he hung up, his communicator rang again on its own. This time, someone had dialed him. "Howard," Lu Feng asked. "The ground underneath Building 3 cannot be shelled anymore. Our men found crawl tracks and found at close quarters with monsters. Oh, no. Our men found crawl tracks and fought at close quarters with the monsters underground," Howard said. "Some men were wounded. The ones with heavy wounds have already been shot, and the ones with light wounds are currently being sent out. You have to keep watch. Lu Feng looked downstairs. I can see them. After saying that, he added, worms are highly dangerous. Send them out immediately once they come into contact with mucus as well. Howard uttered a curse, but Lu Feng's expression remained unchanged. He said, pay attention to the dispenser. At present, no tracks headed towards the dispenser have been discovered. Howard's tone of voice was a bit forceful. The foundation beneath the foundation beneath the dispenser is stronger than that of the building. Just concentrate on your own job duties, Colonel Lu. Lu Feng said flatly. Thank you for your hard work. The call ended. From the tone, it may not have been a pleasant call, but Lu Feng seemed to not care. He leaned against the window, his bearing slightly languid, but he was constantly watching the soldiers coming and going from the atrium. Anji knew he was monitoring the soldiers to see if they were safe or not. With nothing to do, Anji continued examining the massive apparatus in the atrium. From the conversation between Lu Feng and the others just now, he guessed that this was the aforementioned ultrasonic dispenser. He was familiar with this term, for it was mentioned in the base handbook. So again, read the base handbook. Oh no, he did. He read the table of contents, but he didn't read the rule book? Would that be in the handbook? I don't know. He was familiar with this term, for it was mentioned in the base handbook. The base's outer city had a total of 10 ultrasonic dispensers, all of which were managed by the Dispersion Center located in District 1. Before, in Mr. Shaw's shop, he had also heard the base broadcast say that it was currently the breeding season for arthropod class and parasitic class monsters. To prevent aerial invasion, the base raised the operating strength of the ultrasonic dispensers to level 3. That was to say, the apparatus's function was to protect the entire base against invasion by airborne monsters such as arthropods and birds. Anji didn't know how it worked. He only felt it seemed very magical. Science! After examining every single one of the dispenser's details, he turned his gaze back to the interior of the room. The office was by no means large and did not have anything except for 2 sets of desks and chairs, a gun rack, a few filing cabinets. Many things were neatly stacked within the filing cabinets. There were papers. Many things were neatly stacked within the filing cabinets. There were papers with contents he couldn't see in file folders, a few copies of the base handbook, some apparatus operation guides, and a base constitution that were 4 fingers width thick. Turned out that the laws portion in the base handbook was an abridged version. Oh, that makes sense. Anji continued looking around. Below the document organizers were some jars. Below the document organizers were some jars. Most of them were empty, but there was one on the side that seemed to contain a dozen or so plant seeds. Side of that, there was also a bag of something akin to soil samples with a white safe label stuck on it. Anji thought of his spore once again. Seeds and spores were roughly similar. Would his spore, which the military had dug out, have also been placed in a glass jar or some other container? As soon as he imagined it, the instinctive discomfort surged up again. He seemed to have been placed in an airtight jar as well. His spore was the most important part of him, but he still didn't know where it was. Moreover, all of the leads were cut off by this arbiter next to him. If he wanted to find his spore, he would have to ask Lu Feng for information. But he was only a mushroom. He knew he wouldn't like human. He wasn't like humans. He will like humans. He knew he wasn't like humans. He also knew that Lu Feng's power of observation was very fearsome. There was a high probability that as soon as he spoke up, he would be suspected. Or he could also do his best to observe Lu Feng for some time. With that thought, he suddenly gave a start, then turned his head and met Lu Feng's eyes. In the lamplight, he didn't know how long those long and narrow deep green eyes been watching him for, his expression indifferent. Anji suspected that he was being suspected again, but he had to bluff his way through. Facing the colonel's gaze, he blinked. The colonel's expression didn't change at all as he said in a calm voice, "You may go." The buffer period was over. "Back down there?" Anji asked. The prisoners were all living in the makeshift tents in the atrium. Anji bit his lower lip. After a while, his yearning for his spoor overcame his fear of the colonel. He said, "It's cold there." Eyeing him, Lu Feng said, "You're a prisoner." "But I haven't committed any crimes of indecency." Lu Feng looked at him. 2 seconds later, he smiled. "All right," Lu Feng said. "For the crime of illegally stealing the arbiter's information, the penalty will be doubled." "I didn't steal it," Anji tried hard to explain himself. "I only made something according to your information." "Oh," Lu Feng said. "For the crime of using the arbiter's information to make illegal profits, the penalty will be doubled twice." Anji lowered his voice. "I didn't make a profit either." "Thank you so much, Cookielicious. And that's more than okay. I hope you have a great time today and good luck at college." Thank you for watching. I'm going to keep continuing, but it'll be up on the site when I'm done. So feel free to catch up later. I will be streaming Thursday and we'll reset the internet before I begin. So hopefully we have a clear stream throughout. But good luck and have a wonderful rest of your day. All right. Okay. Bye. All right. Anji lowered his voice. "I didn't make a profit either." Lu Feng looked at him with the arms crossed. "Didn't make a profit? Did you take it for personal use?" Anji was at a loss for words. He couldn't outspeak him. Lu Feng looked at him, frowning slightly. "How much profit?" "I don't know," Anji said. "What are your wages?" 600 R. Or 60 R. 600 would probably be nice. Lu Feng laughed again. "How pitiful," he said. "Your boss cheated you. After you get out of prison, remember to ask him for a raise." Anji felt that he was being mocked again. This was the third time tonight that this person angered him. Firmly believed that Lu Feng was the human who was the best at bullying others within the base. Before he thought of what to say, he saw Lu Feng glance down at his watch. "It's early morning now." His voice once again took on the commanding tone Anji was familiar with. "Go down and sleep." At that very moment, the cold night wind blew in from the window directly onto Anji's face. The temperature difference between day and night at the base were very big. He let out and then saw Lu Feng across from him furrow his brows, seemingly disgusted. Frowning, Lu Feng said coldly, "So delicate." Anji confirmed that he was being viewed with disgust. But the wind was too cold. Able to resist, he sneezed again. Achoo! He truly was very afraid of the cold, and he also wanted to look for clues at Lu Feng's side. If he looked at the colonel's facial expression, he realized that if he stayed any longer, he may be thrown out the window. He had no choice but to bow his head and silently gather his shirt collar, stand up, and turn to leave. Just as he reached the doorway, he heard Lu Feng's voice come from behind him. "Halt." Anji halted and turned back. Lu Feng was still leaning against the window with his arms crossed. His gaze shifted to the right side of the room and he said, "You can go over there." Following his gaze, Anji saw another door on the right-hand wall. He walked over and opened it. It was a nap room with a single bed and desk. At the door, there was an upright clothes stand upon which a black uniform coat hung. Anji realized whose room this was. He said, "You." "I can't sleep tonight," Lu Feng said. "You can choose to sleep here or outside." After weighing the options, Anji said resolutely, "Thank you." Without a word, Lu Feng turned to face the window and continued observing the area below. Sound outside had never stopped. It was still utter chaos. Anji walked into the room, and after closing the door, he examined the place. The room was filled with a cheerless atmosphere. There wasn't any trace of human habitation, save for a few creases in the folded quilt at the end of the bed. On the wooden table, there were some detached magazines and a blunt silver military knife next to them. But those were not what attracted. On the wooden table, there were some detached magazines and a blunt silver military knife next to them. But those were not what attracted Anji's gaze. In the middle of the table was an open book. On the pages were black handwriting. 6.16 normal. 6.15 normal. 6.14 normal. Anji realized what this was. This was the arbiter's work notebook. During the demonstration against the trial court, there was a poster written with the words, "Publicize the arbiter's work notes." By the looks of it, based on how perfunctory Lu Feng's notebook was, even if it was publicized, there wasn't much worth seeing. He flipped back to May. Amidst a string of normals, there was an additional line. 5.17 parasitic invasion resolved. Report to be submitted. 5.18 normal. 5.17 report submitted. He continued upwards. 5.11 normal. Suspect ID 32611705514. Extremely low risk. Passed genetic examination. Permitted to enter city. It's sad that I realize that that's his number. That's his number. It seemed that on the day that it seemed that on that day at the city gates, Lu Feng had not only discovered his abnormality, but also how weak he was. But he didn't stop there, for a kind of intuition drove him to keep flipping backwards through the pages. Mr. Shaw said that all members of the military, even if they belonged to the trial court, would go out on missions in the wilderness. And there was one of the trial court's bullet shells at the place where he had lost his spore. Anji's heart pounded as he hastily flipped through a dozen or so pages, when one record different from the rest stood out before his eyes. 2.20 Return to base. Samples handed over to Lighthouse. Anji's gaze paused on this line before he continued to flip. The records on this page suddenly became much more compacted. 2.12 Wilderness. Abyss. Supplemented 4 map records. Collected 7 plant samples, 4 animal samples, 7 secretion samples, 3 mixed polymorphic monster behavior information footages. 3.13 Wilderness. Abyss. Collected 13 plant samples, 3 animal samples, 3 secretion samples, 6 mixed polymorphic monster behavior information footage. He had gone to the abyss. Anji's eyes flew wide open and his gaze stopped on the page's last record. 2.14 Wilderness. Return home. Collected 1 abnormal fungus sample. Parentheses, spore. Anji's mind went blank for a moment, and his hand that was holding the page trembled. In his time as a mushroom, he didn't have much of a concept of time. Sunrises and sunsets were only a type of change in the course of nature. He didn't know how long he had lost his spore for. February 14th. According to human seasons, that was when winter had not yet ended. Oh, he lost it on Valentine's Day? That's kind of sad. According to human seasons, that was when winter had not yet ended. It was indeed so, for the howling cold winds of the night he lost his spore still echoed in his memories and dreams. There would be no other mushroom in the world who had likewise lost its spore in the same winter. His meeting with Lu Feng occurred far earlier than that time at the city gates. And perhaps it was the arbiter himself, separated from him by only a wall, who had personally taken his spore. He paused, then flipped forward through the work notebook. On the next page, February 20th, Lu Feng had returned to the base and written down samples handed over to the lighthouse. After his gaze lingered on that line for 3 seconds, he flipped the journal back to June 17th and put the black ballpoint pen back on the page, as if it had never been flipped through. Anji looked away from the book and at the wall behind the desk. The arbiter held ultimate authority within the base, could open fire on any person and also order the cooperation of all organizations in the city. In emergency situations, he could mobilize the City Defense Agency soldiers, just like the day at the Supply Depot Square. But despite his high position and authority, his quarters in the City Defense Agency were even more desolate and simple than Anji's own rooms. Even the walls had only received a thin layer of paint, faintly revealing the texture of the gray cement beneath. On this light gray wall, on a place slightly above the height of a person, 7 words in a period were written with red paint. Humankind's interests take precedence over all else. Anji shivered slightly. Anji shivered lightly. The underground prison was too cold, and he still hadn't yet recovered. Turned his gaze to the nearby bed. After hesitating for a few seconds, he got in. His head sank down onto the pillow, but he didn't dare to wrap the quilt around himself as usual. He only loosely draped it over himself and curled up. The quilt, pillow, and bed sheets were all the base's standard issue, with no differences whatsoever from the underground prisoners' beds. Even the scent of the synthetic material was identical, but Anji felt that it was very different. Sleeping upon the arbiter's bed, along with the sound of brief conversation between Lu Feng and some other person from the office on the other side of the wall, the feeling was difficult to describe. Very dangerous, yet also very safe. Anyone would have trouble sleeping in this situation, let alone himself, a mushroom. But he actually didn't have trouble sleeping for too long. Lost in fanciful thoughts, his body gradually warmed up due to the quilt. The world before his eyes gradually blurred, and in that manner tumbled into a dream. Someone woke Anji up, and he was convinced that only a short time had passed since he had fallen asleep. Just a moment ago, he was still experiencing the feeling of having his spore dug out for the umpteenth time in the wilderness. Then he felt a hand patting the pillow next to him. Anji gave a start and then opened his eyes, meeting a pair of cold green eyes. It was the murderer who dug out his spore. Fang lifted the quilt off of him and quickly said, "Evacuate." There was no need for him to explain. The moment Anji woke up, he also realized the building beneath him was trembling slightly, just like the underground prison. Had worms appeared beneath this building as well? For pondering briefly, the wave-like alarm went off again. It was another evacuation signal. Before he had time to think much, he leapt out of bed and put on his shoes. Lu Feng grabbed Anji's shoulder with his right hand and led him out of the room. Cold wind blew in from the open door, and Anji instinctively shivered, having suddenly came to the situation from the warm quilt. Right away, he felt the hand Lu Feng was holding him with pause. A black shadow dropped onto him, and he felt its weight on his body. Lu Feng had grabbed the coat from the nearby clothes rack and tossed it onto him. Oh my god, he's got a boyfriend coat. Anji did not have time to say thank you, only gathering the coat around himself. Lu Feng's movements didn't stop. He swiftly picked up the work notebook and ballpoint pen from the table, stuffed them into the pocket of the coat covering Anji, and then grabbed his wrist and quickly walked towards the exit. 2 judges were already waiting at the doorway. Upon seeing Lu Feng, they promptly called out, "Colonel!" Then, the 2 of them simultaneously glanced at Anji. Lu Feng didn't say anything, and the group went downstairs from the nearest emergency passage. The interior of the passage was pitch black, for the monster's assault had affected the power systems. Only the green fluorescent guiding lights were still glowing. The stairs were both narrow and steep, so they could only just manage to accommodate two people side by side. The other three moved too quickly. Liu Feng dragged Anji down one floor. The latter had already stumbled a good number of times and realized that unless he changed into Hype, would not only be unable to keep pace with these people, but also slow down Lu Feng. Just as he was about to say there was no need for Lu Feng to pull on him, that he'd walk on his own, the force was suddenly applied to his shoulder. As Lu Feng grabbed it and twisted him backwards, the momentum of going down the stairs was still there. Anji instantly ran into Lu Feng's back. He had bumped his head against the badge on Lu Feng's chest earlier. Now he bumped it against the palette. The gear sloped downwards, and he was at a higher position than Lu Feng, so with this collision, he instinctively clutched at Lu Feng. Then the man picked him up in a piggyback carry. That's kind of cute. With arms wrapped around the Arbiter's neck, Anji recalled the chaotic but also seemingly logical sequence of movements and felt very mystified. Yet, I imagine you and those two other military guys are very, very confused. The key point was that this person didn't seem to exert any effort while carrying him, instead easily leaping down the stairs and landing steadily on the ground. He made a run up to the second floor window, leapt out of it, and leveraged the platform outside of the first floor window. The wind howled in Anji's ears, and somehow Lu Feng landed on the lawn beneath the building. Lu Feng clearly did not have the obvious bulky brawn of Vance or Howard, but through the layers of clothing, Anji still felt his terrifying explosive power the moment he tensed up. Human bodies were by no means the same as soft Type. After Lu Feng landed, the sound of two others landing came in quick succession behind him. It was the two other judges. Feng felt that just holding on to Lu Feng used up a lot of his energy, but it was clearly also a human body. But his was clearly also a human body. Realized that the difference between people were greater still than the differences between people and mushrooms. But 3 seconds later, he realized that all the people inside the atrium were looking at him. The sky had brightened earlier, and the light mist couldn't block others' gazes at all. Mr. Shaw stuck his head out from the nearest tent, glancing first at Lu Feng, then glanced at him, and promptly began to make suggestive faces at, oh my god, make suggestive faces at him. Lu Feng put him down, and Anji also loosened his grip around Lu Feng's neck as he landed. Thank you, he said. You're welcome, Lu Feng said. Go to the tents. The tents were just a few steps away. Anji gave an affirmative response and turned, only to run it right into the approaching Howard. What's the matter? Lu Feng asked. The situation has changed. Many more have suddenly come. When the lighthouse's people come and on the radar, it showed that there are bugs beneath all 4 buildings, Howard said. It's not just 1 or 2, but a group. It's a bug nest beneath the City Defense Agency. They broke through the earth to attack the people in the building. Full evacuation? Lu Feng asked. Full evacuation. You as well, Howard said with finality. Lu Feng said, let me see the radar imaging. No need to look, it's beyond saving. The dispenser is here. Howard's voice went cold as he dug in his heels. The dispenser can't be protected anymore. How many more times do you want me to say it? After evacuating, I'll immediately contact the dispersion center to increase the operating system of the other 9 dispensers. Anji looked and saw that Lu Feng's expression was icy, and his right hand to rest on the gun at his waist as he repeatedly articulating each word clearly said, show me the radar imaging. You! Howard seemed furious that afraid of the Arbiter's privilege of killing at any time and any place, waved his hand in a certain direction. A man in a plain shirt walked over from the other side, holding a black instrument in a hand. Lu Feng took the instrument from his and scanned the screen. She watched helplessly as the temperature on his face dropped from 0 degrees Celsius to 18 below zero. His voice was so cold that it could make shards of ice form. The monster's objective isn't the people in a building, it's the dispenser. His gaze lifted to look at It's the dispenser. His gaze lifted to look at Howard, his speech quick. The atrium has the dispenser and its foundation is reinforced and can't be broken, so they can only emerge from the building, from beneath the 4 buildings. The lighthouse's report does not support your conclusion, Colonel Liu. Spent half of every year in the abyss. With fingers pressed down on the gun stock, Lu Feng narrowed his eyes slightly, and his icy intimidation made everyone freeze. Howard, I've seen more monsters than you have people. Howard was silent for 3 seconds, not saying anything. Then, as if he suddenly thought of something, his pupils dilated and his expression changed drastically. Then the other dispensers, contact the dispersion center, Lu Feng said, immediately. The judge behind him took out a communicator, dialed a string of numbers, and pressed the speaker key. Beep! The monotonous tone played. Beep! Beep! It was silent throughout the atrium. After 9 whole tones, a hurried, busy tone came from the communicator, and 3 seconds later, the busy tone stopped. Nobody answered, and the communicator automatically hung up. Howard swiftly pulled out his communicator, and after punching in a few buttons, he said to the other side, City Defense Agency, Colonel Howard, transfer me to the dispersion center. Any line is fine at once. Please wait. The operator's voice came through. After that sentence, there was a long silence. A full 3 minutes later, the operator's voice came again, a slight tremble at the end of his words. The dispersion center is unreachable. Ooh. All right, that is the end of chapter 8. Let me see how many pages chapter 9 is. All right, so it starts 159 and it ends at 167. All right, we can do chapter 9. Let me just take a tea break real quick. All right. Internet is still working. That's good. All right. Chapter 9. Those 10 days were truly a bloodbath. Oh, man. Here it goes. The second after the operator finished speaking, Lu Feng's countenance changed. Turned on his heel and left, and the lighthouse researcher quickly followed. One of the trial court's cars were parked outside the City Defense Agency, and a young judge came running over. Colonel! You all will stay and assist the City Defense Agency, Lu Feng said. Colonel, do we need to convene the trial court? Feng's gaze swept over the thin streams of people on the road. Close the city gates and gather in District 5. Yes, sir, the judge said. Stay safe, Colonel. Lu Feng didn't say anything as he slammed the car door shut and started the engine. Turned the steering wheel hard, and the black car made a swift U-turn before heading towards the dispersion center in District 1 like an arrow leaving its bowstring. Following closely in its wake were Howard's car and the Defense City Agency's heavily armored vehicles. In the back seat, the researcher was holding a communicator and having a conversation as well. He was being questioned. We're currently headed to the dispersion center, researcher said. We must prepare for the worst-case scenario. For now, it is suspected that the special frequency used by the ultrasonic dispersers to drive off arthropods and birds is simultaneously attracting underground worms. There is also no doubt that this was a premeditated attack. Yes, we are currently contacting the other disperser locations. At the same time, in the middle of the city, the sound of the alarm tower abruptly rang out. Its constant shrill wail was deafening. After hearing it, the countenances of the people sparsely scattered on this early morning streets changed drastically, and after looking at each other, they bolted towards the nearest building as the sustained sound meant find emergency shelter. At the same time, the street broadcast began to play, and a pleasant robotic female voice said, Alert! Due to a breakdown of the ultrasonic dispenser, insects, birds, and worm-class monsters may appear in the city in the near future. Before repairs are confirmed, please immediately close all doors and windows and refrain from going out. Upon discovering a suspicious situation, please immediately dial the emergency line. Contact the City Defense Agency. The base's military will do all it can to protect your safety. Alert! Due to a breakdown of the ultrasonic dispenser, insects, birds, and worm-class monsters may appear in the city in the near future. The sounds of windows slamming shut came in an unbroken succession from the residential buildings all around, and the transferred to the nearest residential area. Oh, no, no, no. And the city defense agency's workers and prisoners were swiftly transferred to the nearest residential area. Steady streams of armored vehicles emerged from the city defense agency's various garrison points within the base and dispersed all over the roads. Anji, Mr. Shaw, and Poet were in the same room. City Defense Agency had its hands full with its own matters, and of the three of them, one had committed the crime of incitement, one had committed the crime of illegally stealing the arbiter's information, one had been crimed with some strange accusations by the arbiter. In short, they posed no lethal threat, so no soldier kept watch on them, and they were only locked in. The dispersion center remotely manages all the dispensers in the outer city. Poet looked out the window. In the air of the wilderness, even a tiny flying bug may infect humans. Only by using special frequency ultrasound to disperse them can the base maintain the residents' absolute safety. Not even a fly can get into the base. If something really has happened to the dispersion center, then the entire city is exposed to the possibility of infection. To insects in the midst of breeding season, human flesh and blood make the best breeding grounds for their eggs. Anji sat on the bare bed board, hugging his knees. He asked, "What will happen?" Poet reached out and pinched the nape of Anji's neck. Supposing that a little bug laid its eggs beneath their skin last night, bug genes and your human genes will fuse. Another 3 days at most, you'll be a bag of skin wrapped around up to 100 million insect eggs. Little bugs will fly out from your eyes and windpipe onto other people, and very soon. Don't scare the kid, Mr. Shaw said, clearly disgruntled by this exchange. Poet leisurely retracted his hand. I'm speaking the truth. The xenogenic, whose stomach Lu Feng had cut open that day at the supply depot square, suddenly appeared before Anji's eyes. His abdominal cavity and windpipe were full of small, translucent bugs. He asked, "Then what can we do?" Poet shook his head. Can only pray that nothing major happens to the dispersion center or that the disruptor can quickly be repaired soon after. Otherwise, he sighed softly. Otherwise, either there will be a base-wide outbreak or Judgment Day will repeat itself. Anji frowned as he looked at the deserted streets throughout the window. But he heard Mr. Shaw ask, "You know about Judgment Day?" "I've heard a bit about it," Poet said. Mr. Shaw sighed. "Thought that so long as I obediently stayed within the base, I could live until I died of old age." "The base has been safe for too long," Poet said, still looking into the distance. "I always forget that safety is what's temporary while danger is eternal. That's pretty deep. Life isn't something we're owed. Life is a gift." And G didn't really understand, nor did he know how to ask about it. He only had one question. What is Judgment Day? But Mr. Shaw glanced at him. "Forgot to ask you, what's the story behind your clothes?" Anji was at a loss for words. Lu Feng's coat was still draped over his shoulders, and in the coat pocket were Lu Feng's work notebook and ballpoint pen. Mr. Shaw narrowed his eyes. "Last night, when Poet and I were in the tents, where were you?" he asked. "Did you sleep with him?" "No." Anji always felt that Mr. Shaw was interrogating him, replied in a small voice. "He didn't sleep." Mr. Shaw let out a huff of laughter. "How did you know he didn't sleep? You did sleep with him. How was he? Fess up." Anji knew that he couldn't outspeak anyone, so he pretended to not hear his question. Instead, he repeated his own. "What is Judgment Day?" "Then how do you know how the Arbiter's Code was proposed?" Poet asked him. "I don't," Anji said. Poet looked at Mr. Shaw. The elder must know. Mr. Shaw said with a lift of his eyebrows. I do. Poet said. How old are you? But Mr. Shaw didn't reply. He said, When I was young, everyone greatly supported the bill. Poet sat down on the corner of the bed right next to Unji. His gray prison uniform was worn out in some places. His black shoulder-length hair was tied at the back of his head in a simple manner. His facial expression was very calm. When he spoke, it was with a contrived cadence that was perhaps the tone commonly used by those in Poet's line of work. The Arbiter's Code has lasted for almost 70 years. I think the northern base is very grateful towards it. Don't know much about that thing in particular because the base has too few old people. Mr. Shaw's interest seemed to have finally shifted from the question of how Unji slept. As he played with small mannequin parts he had taken out from his pocket, he said, I also heard it from others when I was young. Do tell, Poet said. After the southeastern base met its doom, everyone was very afraid. In those days, the xenogenics degree of mutation was not yet as severe as it is now. That was a quick one. Am I live? Still here? Hello? Alright, I think it's fine. I'm not sure how much you heard of the other part, so I'm going to go back to... Correct, Mr. Shaw said, but the enactment of the bill wasn't because of the bugs, but because of a surveillance recording. When a superior was making a routine inspection of the water tower footage, saw that something had happened in one corner, but the spot was too dark and not clearly captured on video, so nobody discovered it at the time. The moment the superior saw the footage, he was scared out of his wits. Guys can't imagine the sight. Mr. Shaw's story piqued Anji's interest, and he saw that Poet was also listening with rapt attention. Then he heard Mr. Shaw continue. He saw a person with a very strange posture walk to the edge of the circulating pool. Then that person sat down like they had no bones in their body. I heard from the people who recorded the footage that the person was like a human-shaped leech. For sitting down, he stuck his legs into the pool. He was a xenogenic and using his secretions to pollute the water source? Poet asked. Mr. Shaw smiled. Huh, that wouldn't have caused that much fear. Poet raised his eyebrows. Then that person's legs turned into something translucent and whitish. As if they had exploded, a large patch diffused into the water. There's no way to describe it. Mr. Shaw shook his head and continued. And after that, the person's entire body also flowed into the pond, and the water level immediately rose by a lot. I heard people say it was like it had been stuffed full of white minced pork. The water was that water was part of the base's water circulation system. After that, it flowed away throughout the outlet along with the water, which was the base's drinking water, Shaw said. Made it even worse was that it was a recording from more than 20 hours prior already. Oh, that's gross. That's gross. Poet frowned slightly, seemingly somewhat nauseated. Only after his Adam apple had bobbed a few times did he say, the whole city was exposed. Correct, Mr. Shaw said. The lighthouse gave out its investigation results. It was a soft-bodied aquatic xenogenic, and diffusing into the water may have been a reproductive method. In short, the entire base was at risk of infection, and nobody was safe. The bill was urgently enacted soon afterwards. There's a saying, Poet said, that the initial generations of arbiters in the trial court did not belong to the military, but was subordinate institutions of the lighthouse instead. It's also correct. After the aquatic xenogenic invasion, amongst the lighthouse's scientists, some studied humanoid xenogenics and understood quite a lot about their characteristics. They formed the trial court, and in 10 days they organized for everyone in the base to be examined one by one. Nobody was wounded, but anyone could have been infected. They also did not have any methods with which to perform inspections, so it was entirely dependent on observation by the naked eye and intuitive judgment. Although you've done nothing but drink a mouthful of water, if the trial court wanted you to die, you had to die. Mr. Shaw sighed. Those 10 days were truly a bloodbath. It said that half the entire base died. That's awful. It's roughly the same as the information I collected before, Poet said. Those 10 days were the legendary Judgment Days. Only those of you who fiddle with your pens, all mysterious like, say that those 10 days are Judgment Days and talk about God and whatnot, Mr. Shaw said with a frown. Poet smiled. On Doomsday, everyone on earth will be judged before God and either ascend to heaven or be cast down into hell. That is Judgment Day. Who knows? Mr. Shaw brushed the dust off his sleeve cuffs. After the Virginia base caught wind of it, they cursed out our base's strategic decision, dispatched a scientific research team over so they could have devices that differentiate xenogenics on a scientific basis, and circulated opposition leaflets everywhere with drones, denouncing the northern base for its loss of humanity and violation of human rights. And the result? Poet said in a low voice. 3 years later, humanoid marine xenogenics invaded, and the Virginia base was completely infected and declared fallen. With the idiots of the Virginia base as an example, the Arbiter's Code was formally extended. Any judge could shoot people. Those whom the judges couldn't make decisions on were given over to the Arbiter to make a decision with their full powers, and they would bear no responsibility for manslaughter. The Arbiter is God, Mr. Shaw grinned. Unfortunately, it's easy for God to go mad. After killing too many of their own people, they won't be able to stop. The Lighthouse's scientists who were responsible for the trials were switched out batch after batch. 10 years, 3 went mad and 2 committed suicide. Nobody else was willing to do it, so the military took over. This is depressing. People in the military are stationed in the wilderness for long periods of time, have seen many monsters, have a decent ability to distinguish xenogenics, and are psychologically strong. The speed at which arbiters were replaced was finally changed from one going mad every 3 years to one going mad every 5. Yufeng wasn't even 20 years old when he became the arbiter. I think he's too young, and I even bet with others that he wouldn't last past 3 years. Lost no small amount of money, Mr. Shaw shrugged. This year will be his 7th. Hubbard said that the number of people he's killed is several times the amount of the previous arbiter. Moreover, in each of these past 3 years, the number kept doubling. Everyone knows he's not far off from going mad. Between the arbiter and the person being judged, it's hard to say whose psychological pressure is greater. Poet leaned against the wall. Since Colonel Liu still has the frame of mind to sleep with our young friend, it looks like he's still far away from losing control. No, that's wrong. So he finished speaking and frowned and corrected himself. On the contrary, for a cold and heartless person like Colonel Liu, this is one of the omens of madness. He sidled up to Anji, a look similar to Mr. Shaw's in his eyes. How was he? Did he hurt you? Anji tightly wrapped himself in the coat and shrank into the corner, reluctant to talk to them. Thump. Sound of an impact. The atmosphere in the room instantly tensed, and all 3 of them looked at the source of the sound. A colorful beetle had struck the window. And with that, we end chapter 9, and that marks the end of our live stream. Thank you so much, Mars Rover, for hanging with me the whole time. I'm so sorry about the internet. I really hope Thursday will be better. We did it. We did do it. We stuck through it. We did it. It says it's been 2:26, so like almost 2.5 hours. So like we did it, and I think it's really starting to draw us in. Like it's really getting interesting, and I can't wait to read more. So I will be doing this on Thursday as well. Let me see how long the chapters are, because I was thinking, okay, chapter 10 isn't too long. So even if these other ones are long, I think I will do 3 chapters again. Okay. Yeah, I can do 3 chapters. This isn't bad. All right. Nice. You work in tech. I've got some good friends in tech. So, all right. Yeah. I will try again internet-wise next week. At least we didn't have, I'm learning, we didn't have to make a second video this time. Time yet? Oh, it's 2 hours, 27 minutes, 39. Oh, the time. It'll be the same time as today. Yes. 8 o'clock Central Standard Time or 6 o'clock Kichter time. Yeah. I think it's going to be pretty consistent with the 8 Central Standard. Just because it works. Thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun, kind of just bouncing back, and I really do appreciate how cool you've been and how you've stuck with me. All right. It is actually getting pretty late here, and I have work in the morning, but thank you so much again for coming. And I look forward to seeing you on Thursday. Goodbye.